Welcome to the final chapter of Veracity, the social context of evaluation. My name is Matthew Joy, and I'm going to be guiding you through sort of the more relevant or salient pieces of this chapter. It tends to be a pretty long one, so I just tried to get concise with the information and bring to you as educational leadership students what I believe to be the more important parts of it. So a quick reminder, what is evaluation? Well, it's essentially a political activity undertaken to develop policy, guide and model social intervention, and possibly improve upon existing social programs. So it's more of an applied form of evaluation as opposed to academic evaluation, which I'll go into in more detail in a moment. But I wanted to make sure that we all remember that it's really meant to modify existing programs or sort of evaluate their really if their effectiveness and to improve upon them. So social policy, is it a panacea? Is it a cure-all to solving social problems or social issues? Well, we're going to come to find that it can be effective, but it can also be ineffective in certain ways based on some of these three things: methodology, competencies, and politics. So in terms of methodology, there is contention often regarding evaluation procedures. Certain stakeholders decide that maybe they disagree or agree with the findings. The dissemination of the findings, how that's relayed to the public or relayed to the different stakeholders, and different strategies for utility. So different ways that information is actually used can tend to be differing in the response. Competencies, individuals who perform the evaluations and their abilities. Certainly we like to think that all the evaluators are competent in what they do, but maybe they aren't necessarily. Consumers of evaluations, those stakeholders that actually use them, are they competent in reading the findings and using them properly? And the competencies of policymakers who use disseminated findings. And then there also is the politics of the political nature of the organization requesting the evaluation, economic constraints, perceived social change in a democratic society. All these things sort of relate in that political realm to sort of figure out, well, are we using the evaluation to the best of its ability and in the most socially just way? Okay, this is the difference between evaluation as applied research versus an academic research. So we're looking at the contrast. So why is academic research done? Typically used to contribute to a narrow knowledge base. So it's more gauged toward those individuals that are used to seeing that particular program or are in that sort of world. Applied research, conversely, may solve a practical problem. Training, academic researchers are generally trained in a single discipline, so they're kind of narrow in their field. But evaluators require familiarity with a variety of disciplines. In order to really affect that social change, they need to be versed in a lot of different things related to information and fields outside of what they're actually researching. So ethics. I think it's pretty standard that ethics and professional standards are of a concern in both academic and applied research, but applied research requires greater attention because of its societal importance, because of it relates to a societal impact impacting probably a lot more people, a lot more stakeholders. So there's an ethical concern there, and toward the very end of this presentation I'll get into a little bit of what that looks like. And then an audience. Academic researchers are most concerned with the response of their peers, so it's really a close-knit circle of stakeholders in that respect. And then applied researchers are concerned with both peers and society at large because we're affecting that societal change. The social ecology of evaluation. So in order to do a successful evaluation, the researcher or evaluator has to really understand that arena of what they're researching and presenting. Impetus one, or sort of the impact. One might be stimulated by Congress or a federal agency. They might want to do evaluations of innovative programs to check their effectiveness and to pursue sort of their political future further. The next stimulus would be the president of a large foundation might look at the social action programs to evaluate them. And then a third one might be evaluation activities that are more local, more initiated into response from managers and supervisors of operating agencies to focus on things that are going on within their organization, within their administration, to make sure that it's running effectively. So effects of stakeholders on evaluation. Evaluators' work is conducted in a real-world setting of multiple and often conflicting interests. Stakeholders could be extremely diverse in their makeup. and it's obviously going to affect the outcomes of the evaluation and how it's perceived. They might hold competing and sometimes combative views about the appropriateness of evaluation. I'm going to bring up a case study in a moment so we can see how people are affected and how they sort of look at that evaluation differently. And then to conduct their work effectively and contribute to the resolution, they must understand the relationships with the stakeholders as well as the relations between the stakeholders. So it's important for social evaluators to really get to know their stakeholders and become part of that community organization so they can really effectively come up with results that are important to the stakeholders and important to the future of that societal change. However, this is an interesting point. So in an abstract sense, every citizen who should be concerned with the efficacy and efficiency of efforts to improve social conditions has a stake in the outcome of evaluation. So basically what this is saying is that because evaluation in sort of an applied sense is affecting societal change, every person, every citizen should be aware of it and understanding of it and sort of empathetic to that cause because they have a sort of visible interest in that program. The consequences of multiple stakeholders. In terms of perspective, evaluators are often sure whose perspective they should take in designing an evaluation. Really what that means is I think because there are a lot of different stakeholders, because they have a lot of different perspectives and views, for example, government agency, program staff, client, the public, etc., they need to sort of evaluate whose concerns are the most important. Confusion, misunderstandings may arise because of difficulties in communicating with different stakeholders. The vocabulary of evaluation can sometimes be confusing and inaccessible to lay audiences. Certainly if there is a researcher that is using sort of the language of evaluation, it's certainly possible that stakeholders can't understand that, and I'm going to talk about how that can be disseminated in a later date. But just in terms of confusion, it's a pretty important component. Evaluators are encouraged to anticipate the communication barriers relating to stakeholders. So they're supposed to look at, what things might come up in the process of that evaluation to determine, how am I going to make this effective? How am I going to eventually disseminate those findings to make sure that it's understandable to my stakeholder? And then a response. And this is where the case study is going to come into play. There's no guarantee that the outcome will be satisfactory to any particular group of stakeholders. It might not always come out exactly how they expected. So even sponsors of evaluations may turn on the evaluators when the results don't come out exactly as they had planned. And that's where this case study comes in. Response to contrary results. So when results don't come out exactly as they expected, things might occur that they couldn't have foreseen. So this case study, in the mid-1980s, a study was conducted by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Pew Memorial Trust to develop practical data. So enumerating the homeless population in Chicago. So really what they're doing is they're trying to find out the exact numbers of the homeless population in Chicago so that they can better fund the medical clinics. So, the intro. The Mayor's Committee on the Homeless and Chicago Coalition for the Homeless provided figures at the onset. So they had figures before the study was actually initiated. The figures numbered between 20,000 and 25,000 homeless persons in Chicago. So this was a widely recognized number in the city, commonly understood to be about the population of the homeless. So the study initiated, and it was neither endorsed nor condemned by the mayor. They just were sort of curious to see how the results would come out. And the estimate came out to be 2,344 homeless people in Chicago. So obviously this is quite a big difference, and so there was a lot of backlash at that time. So in order to enforce legitimacy to their numbers, the evaluators conducted a phase 2 study, increasing their area sample. What they did was they looked at different populations of possibly homeless people who might have found a place to stay overnight, and so in the first study they weren't considered as being homeless, etc., etc. And using data from both phases, the final estimate, again, not much higher, 2,722. So what was the result? Once the story was picked up by the media and distributed to the community, comments were very critical, suggesting the study was undermining the efforts of all those who were striving to advocate for the homeless. So, as you can see, the study in itself had reasonable sort of impetus to do it, but once the actual study came out, the people that were endorsing it obviously were not pleased by it necessarily. So, oftentimes the stakeholders, they have a different response to results they didn't expect it and didn't want to see. So what is utilization versus empowerment? So different reasons for doing evaluation. The utilization-focused approach asserts evaluations ought to be designed to reflect the interest of primary users and specifies methods for determining in specific cases who they may be. So really this type of utilization is just, or evaluation is for utilization only. What is the purpose of the evaluation? What are we going to use to do it? The other type is empowerment evaluation. So the advocates of this type of evaluation aim that the evaluation should be done to empower marginalized groups, usually poor minorities. And really this is more of a generosity, societal sort of impact evaluation where we want to do good for the people and involve them in the design and analysis of the evaluations and improve upon their quality of life. So again, we look again at when doing an evaluation, whose perspectives we really want to focus. So in this statement that I've put on here is we really possibly want to take the perspectives. It's not to take one in particular, but look at maybe focus on one, but understand that there are many perspectives of stakeholders in the process and to keep that in mind when doing the evaluation. So the importance of dissemination. An evaluation that is not made accessible to its audiences is clearly destined to be ignored. Okay, so this is a very important piece of evaluation. If it's not disseminated properly or at all, then obviously it's not going to be effective or useful in the eyes of the public. So results must be communicated in ways that make it intelligible to the various stakeholder groups. Obviously, the stakeholder groups have to be able to understand the information. Technical reports usually are read only by peers, peers that are actually able to read that type of report, rarely by the stakeholders who count. So they're just not accustomed to reading these voluminous documents, don't have the time to do it, and might not be able to understand them. I know that there are certain studies done in the actual Rossi book that are quite difficult, possibly, at least for me to read as a student of education as opposed to being a student of statistics or program evaluation. So it would help certain individuals or certain stakeholders to see things that are sort of written for the layman. So primary dissemination is communication to sponsors and technical audiences. So this is the technical report. This is the more focused, more data-minded evaluation piece of dissemination. And then secondary dissemination refers to communication of results and recommendations that emerge from evaluation. So this meets the needs of the stakeholders. It could include executive summaries, more attractive special reports, or reports complete with slides and often videos. So it's more agreeable to the general public, the general stakeholder view. So remember, why don't they listen? So the vast number of stakeholders often have varying opinions regarding a program. They're frequently unsupportable, but enthusiastic claims may count more heavily than the coolly objective results of an evaluation. So the role of evaluator really needs to be the expert witness. They are just there to provide the information. Certainly stakeholders will have those varying opinions, but and I think the evaluator likes to think that, well, I'm giving you this logical sort of objective view of what's going on with the program, but really, and that's what they do, they provide the information, and really it's up to the public and up to the stakeholders to sort of figure out how they're going to use that. Evaluation time versus political time. Evaluation time. So large-scale social experiments that estimate, these large major programs, it could require anywhere from 4 to 8 years to complete and document. That obviously is different from the political time, which moves at a much faster pace. Policymakers, politicians, they like to see things right away. They're very impatient. They want to know whether or not the program's achieving its goals or not, and they're looking for something very quickly in a matter of months, not years. So there's a lot of pressure on evaluators, and I think what it says here is that generally a long-term study should not be undertaken if the information is needed before the evaluation can be completed. This is an important thing to look at when first looking at the evaluation to decide, is it going to be done in the right amount of time? Can I get it done? And is it going to make my stakeholders happy? Policy space and policy significance. So policy space is evaluators must be sensitive to the political arena that exists when a program is initiated. So really, this is a responsible impact assessment. It's looking at, well, what social and political context is going to be affected as the evaluation proceeds. I need to know that as I do the evaluation. And then policy significance. An evaluation may produce results that all would agree are statistically significant and generalizable, and yet may be too small to be significant for policy planning and managerial action. This kind of goes back to what is the point of the evaluation? We're looking for policy change, looking for social change. We